Good evening and welcome to Politics Nation. Tonight's lead, in her own words. I'm coming to you from Atlanta, Georgia tonight, where just a couple of hours ago I sat down with Vice President Kamala Harris. We spoke about the historic nature of her race as she is now facing as an extraordinary historic campaign with just 16 days to go until the election. In just 3 months, that election will take place. Vice President Harris has managed to introduce herself to the American people and pull into a dead heat in the polls. Now she's seeking to draw contrast and mobilize her supporters in the final days of the race, including African-American voters. Meantime, her opponent, former President Trump, is ending with an increasingly hostile and erratic closing message. And that's where we start. Here is my exclusive interview with Vice President Kamala Harris. Well, thank you for allowing us on your birthday to sit down and talk.
Of course, Raph, it's good to be
And
with you.
I want to get to the Georgia vote and other issues, but let me ask you, as Vice President, and if you hopefully not presented with it, but as President, with Sinwar having been killed, how would you move toward a ceasefire? What do you think the United States should be doing?
So first of all, look, it's going to be hard. It's going to be difficult, but we have got to get this war over with. We got to get the hostages out. We need the war to end. In fact, we're sending Tony Blinken, Secretary of State, out next week to go and meet with the parties there. And the death of Sinwar, I believe, has removed an obstacle to that end. And so we've got to work at it, and we've got to work at it through diplomatic means, and that's what we intend to do. But listen, the reality of it is that the difficulty of it all is not new to any administration in recent history, and it cannot be the reason that we don't work at it around the clock and be vigilant, and that's what we're going to do, and I think it's very important that that's what we do.
And balance. I mean, I remember in Selma you made very strong statements about civilians being killed on both sides, and you stood up strongly on that. And I think that's a concern in all communities.
Well, I mean, listen, the number of innocent Palestinians that have been killed in Gaza, it's really unconscionable. And we have to be honest about that. And at the same time, listen, I will always stand in terms of Israel's right to defend itself. And we need this war to end.
We're in about a little over 2 weeks to the election.
Yes.
I have to ask you about your opponent. He used a very ugly term about you last night, using the S word as vice president. And how do you react to this kind of street talk from someone who wants to be president again, that was president? I've known you a long time, and I know you have thick skin, but I'm not asking you as a person, because I know you're used to that. But what does it do, in your opinion, to the standards we're setting for our young people all over the country when we're using this kind of locker room street talk about an opponent for president of the United States?
So the American people deserve so much better. That's how I come at it. And to your point, the president of the United States must set a standard, not only for our nation, but understanding the standard that we as a nation must set for the world. You know, we as representing the United States of America walk into rooms around the world with the earned and self-appointed authority to talk about the importance of democracy, rule of law, and have been thought of as a role model, imperfect though we may be, but a role model of what it means to be committed to certain standards, including international rules and norms, but also standards of decorum. And what you see in my opponent, a former president of the United States, really is, it demeans the office. And I have said, and I'm very clear about this, Donald Trump should never again stand behind the seal of the President of the United States. He has not earned the right. He has not earned the right. And that's why he's going to lose.
I remember 1972. I was 17, going on 18. I worked as youth director for Shirley Chisholm's campaign for president. And I was stunned that some of the backlash she got were from black elected male officials saying they didn't want to support a woman. They went with other candidates. I think it was George McGovern. And I hear these people talking about black men that are pulling away from your campaign, though I've not seen any real evidence of that. Do you think some of the resistance of some men, black and white, is misogynist? And are you proud to see that most Americans, even being polled, have no problem supporting a woman at all? And I'm one that lived from Shirley to Kamala in terms of these campaigns.
And I have an emotional reaction to you raising the point of Shirley Chisholm, because it is on her broad shoulders that I stand, and so many of us stand. And we have come a long way, to your point, and on your specific point about including the fact that I have the support of countless black men who are in elected positions, including I'm just this afternoon and 2 church visits today with the mayor of Atlanta. That being said, I think that you are absolutely right, that there is this narrative about what kind of support we are receiving from black men that is just not panning out in reality in terms of when I go to last night Atlanta and had, I think, 10,000 people at a rally. I will also say this, Rev. I am very clear. I must earn the vote of everyone, regardless of their race or gender. And what can be frustrating sometimes is to have journalists ask me this question as though one should assume that I would just be able to take for granted the vote of black men. I think that's actually an uninformed perspective, because why would black men be any different than any other demographic of voter? They expect that you earn their vote. And that is why I am talking and presenting my policies in a way that are, of course, for all Americans, but I will also speak about the specific impact that I can see it having on different demographics of voters.
Well, we're talking about black men, and let's talk about blacks in general.
Yeah.
Because one of the things, you know, I've been on a nonpartisan tour at National Action Network and Central Park 5 and others. And one of the things that reporters ask, and we don't get it from the audience, is what about the Kamala the cop? And I said, well, I knew her as DA.
Right.
You and I go, that she was one that wanted people with marijuana arrest not to go to jail.
Exactly.
And Attorney General wasn't even under your purview. I mean, do you think that this is orchestrated, that they're trying to find some way to separate you from some elements? Because you used to be attacked for being too progressive as a district attorney.
I know. You know what? Here's the thing, Rev. We are, as of today, Sunday, 16 days away from the election for President of the United States, and there are all sorts of people who are going to throw a bunch of things out that will include mis and disinformation with the intention to dissuade certain people from voting. And that's not new. And so that is why I'm spending time in all communities to make sure that they hear directly from me so they can judge for themselves in a way that is unfiltered. And I'm going to continue doing that. I am leaving nothing on the field in this election, leaving nothing on the field. So I sit with you this afternoon after visiting 2 churches today, this Sunday morning. Yesterday I was in Michigan. Tomorrow I'll be in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. And I'm leaving nothing on the field.
The black vote is important, but Georgia's important.
Yes.
Wisconsin's important.
Yes.
And how do you, as you go, dealing with your economic message? I know a lot of people that call my radio show that says, well, what happens, how does this impact my pocket?
Yeah.
I don't know what you mean, Reverend Al, with inflation reduction. I don't know what infrastructure means.
Right.
Share with our viewers on what has impacted them and what a President Harris will do that understands what needs to go in their pocket, not the Beltway language.
So it's a very legitimate and important question the voters asked that we should respond to on the affirmative without waiting for the question. So, for example, how will it affect individuals? Part of my plan is to expand the child tax credit to $6,000, and in particular to target young parents in the first year of their child's life to make sure they have the resources to buy a crib or a car seat or clothes, because, you know, we know that the vast majority of our parents have a natural desire to parent their children well, but not always the resources, especially when you also recognize that we did this, which is expand the child tax credit for less than I'm proposing now. But when we did, we reduced childhood poverty in America by 50%, black childhood poverty reduced by half. Part of my plan is to deal with the home health care of seniors. And I tell a personal story. I often go off script to tell a personal story. When my mother was sick, as it turned out she was dying from cancer, I took care of her. And to take care of an elder relative means to try and cook something they feel like eating or can eat. It means trying to put clothes on them or give them clothes that don't irritate their skin, to help them put on a sweater. It means trying to figure out a way to just bring a smile to their face from time to time, to say something that might make them laugh. It's about dignity. And far too many people who are taking care of elder relatives are struggling, because to do that means often they may have to leave their job, which means they're going to reduce their income, or they have to pay down their savings to qualify for Medicaid. So my plan is to recognize this is about dignity and to say that should not have to happen in order for you to have help to take care of an elder. We're going to have Medicare cover it. And I think about this issue also in the context of people who are in the sandwich generation. And that's what we call people who are taking care of their young kids and their parents.
Wow.
And shouldn't have to think about leaving their job or losing all of their savings in order to apply for Medicaid. These are examples. I talk about what I intend to build, which is an opportunity economy, which in large part understands the vast majority of Americans have ambition, aspirations, they have an incredible work ethic, they have dreams, but not necessarily access to the resources that allow them the opportunity to achieve their goals. Unlike my opponent, who thinks about the world differently, I think informed in large part by the way he experienced life, having been served $400 million on a virtual silver platter, which he then filed bankruptcy 6 times. My opponent, who, when he thinks about tax policy, it's about cutting taxes for the richest among us, billionaires and the biggest corporations, who can afford, by the way, to pay their fair share. His plan for what I call a Trump sales tax would be at least a 20% tax on everyday necessities, which economists have estimated the average American will pay $4,000 more a year. So when asked this question about how will this affect my life in terms of a voter worrying about the fact that, look, price of groceries still too high. I get it, they get it. And what are we doing to help them actually get through life in a way that they're not just getting by but getting ahead? We have to have specific policies that do that. And that is what I offer under what I call an opportunity economy approach. But Donald Trump is offering something very different, including what he's talking about in Project 2025. And I'll tell you, from the biggest rallies I do to church services, people know what's in Project 2025. That's right. They know that it would allow corporations to basically stop protecting the right of workers to have overtime pay. What it would do to take away the independence of the Department of Justice. And as we know, he intends to use it to attack his political enemies. People are very concerned by what Project 2025 would do, which is to get rid of public servants who have dedicated their lives to doing public service and instead putting loyalists in these various agencies so that he can have them bend to his will instead of do the work that is in the public trust.
Last question. I'll go back to where we started with Shirley Chisholm. Today's your birthday.
Yes.
And we all reflect on our birthdays, what our life would mean. You called me on my birthday. Thanks again. What do you want 50 years from now, history to say about Kamala Harris?
I hope that, and I really do work that my life will have proven to have been a life that is about fighting for the people, fighting for the dignity of people, work that has impact in a way that uplifts the people, all people. I do hope that's what history will say.
Some little girl or little boy is going to be talking about you like you talked about Miss C. Shirley Chisholm. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you,
on your
Rev.
birthday.
Thank you, Rev. It's good to be with you again.
All right.
Thank you.